Come, let us gather together this morning with joyful noise, with warm hearts, and with hopeful spirits, for we are one with the renewal of the earth and blessedly held in the love of one another.
Would the families who wish to dedicate their children and babies please come forward at this time? I see so many smiles out there looking this way. Out of the infinite, our children come to us. Out of the mystery beyond knowing, into the here and now, our children are born. From time immemorial, people have gathered with their families and friends to praise the breathtaking miracle of their children. Many cultures, many traditions have meaningful ways of giving thanks for the young ones they hold in their arms and hands and hearts. Once again, we acknowledge the gift of life from which all things come, and we rejoice in the hope and promise of these young lives before us. Children, it is our privilege to welcome you, and we do welcome you. Parents, if you pledge at this time to honor these children as the gift and essence of life itself, to guide them along their life's journey, to raise them in hope and unending love, will you please respond now by saying, "We will"?
We will.
Congregation, if you pledge at this time to share with these children your collective wisdom, your personal patience, your inspired reverence, and your love of life itself, will you please respond now by saying, heartily, "We will"?
We will.
On behalf of all the people gathered here, we offer you in a moment a small gift. May you grow in love, blossom in kindness, and know this place as home. We call this ceremony this morning a dedication. In it, we dedicate and rededicate ourselves to the well-being of each of these children. In fact, to all the children and youth gathered here, children, parents, families, friends, and congregation, thank you for the gifts of life you bring. How do we know right from wrong? We don't. Just like anyone else in the world. We don't know right from wrong. We risk it. Buddhism might call this practice. Science might call it an educated guess. Christianity might call it faith. Other traditions, which I look forward to learning about, might call it by other names. However we describe it, everything that matters to us depends upon us taking that risk. Last week, here in this room, we showed up for that risk. At our congregational meeting, we started a community conversation about what matters most in our lives and in this community. Some of us long for religious experiences here, and some of us long for secular experiences here. This is an opportunity, a conflict, a risk. Though our conversation is only getting started, we acknowledged this diversity out loud last week. Speaking for myself, I said, I trust we can find a way to honor religious experiences and secular experiences and other longings that we may learn about as we go, that these can not only coexist, but that together we can thrive. I also said I live in a mystery about how just yet. It will take our community conversation, our practices, our guesses, our faith. So now I'm going to tell you something that really annoys me. I didn't want to start with a thing that annoys me, and it has nothing to do with you, I promise. This thing that really annoys me in the way that a playground taunt used to annoy me when I was 5. So those of you who are close to 5 or remember being 5 probably know how annoying this is going to be. So just to give you a feel for this particular taunt, there was a boy who was otherwise nice enough, and on the playground, he developed this habit of calling me Carrot. Carrot. And it was so hard to argue with a name like Karen because half of his taunt was actually true. How do you argue with half a taunt or half of a theologian's moral supposition? So here's that supposition that annoys me so much. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr said, essentially, that groups are not capable of making moral decisions because groups have no moral center, no conscience. It's only individuals making moral or immoral decisions acting together. Yes, groups are capable of incomprehensible violence and injustice. It's actually mind-boggling when I think about it. Still, this analysis bothers me almost as much as that playground taunt, Carrot, used to bother me when I was 5. While groups themselves may have no central conscience, I believe individuals develop any kind of center because of them. Babies and children who we celebrated mightily this morning and will continue to celebrate throughout the course of our lives as a congregation together, science says need not just food from us and milk and words of wisdom. They need actual physical touch just to survive. More and more, we are learning that the human experience isn't nature competing with nurture or nurture competing with nature, but nurture allowing our nature to develop. So everyone who has a reptilian brain, I think that's everybody here and most of those living in the world, that's the instinctive oldest part of our brain. All of us who have that are born with an instinctive basic morality that tells us things like, don't harm your baby. Yet, I'm very sad to say that last year, more than 1,700 children in our state were confirmed to be victims of child abuse and neglect, mostly at the hands of people they know and love. How could someone harm their own child? One of the best reasons to make that bad decision is social isolation from the community. Isolated people without groups are more likely than they otherwise would be to reach a point of stress from which they harm a child. At my day job, so to speak, working to prevent child abuse, we are urging a cultural shift. Instead of seeing child abuse as bad people doing bad things, we urge communities to lean toward people in stress, to wrap around them so they can better wrap around their children. We need community like water needs a river. The first penitentiaries, places for penitence, were based on the very solid belief that the individual was closer to God than the group could be. So the treatment for criminal action was to be removed from any group experience or group influence and live in solitary confinement with God alone. as you can imagine, people lost their minds. So I've got my own brief testimonial. I had been embroiled in some very bad feelings about an acquaintance. I'm confessing that to you right now. I felt very justified. This happened, and that happened, and the other thing happened. And then I came to choir rehearsal, and we sang that song we just sang. And then I came to choir rehearsal again, and we sang that same song again. In case you couldn't pick out the words, maybe we were singing like rock stars instead of a choir. It goes, we are peace, we are war, we are how we treat each other, nothing more. And I felt a physical pang every time I sang that in the context that I was bringing to that choir rehearsal. So thanks not only to that music and the songwriters, but to the community of the choir, I was in a context where my conscience could be challenged and I could respond. Sitting there in that rehearsal that day, or then again the next, the words of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of each person, kept knocking at my heart and mind. I cringed at the way that even within my own self, I was making worthlessness and war. So my relationships with the choir, nurtured by my relationships with this community, helped me reorient to peace. So yes, the group can do wrong things. The group can be a mob. We see this in our own time, I believe I see it. The group can be that industrialized war machine or racism machine that Niebuhr warned about. Maybe it all depends on that frame of reference that Henry Riegler was talking about and we were talking about together in last Sunday's program. To remind you, if we want to change human belief, the base of human action, we aren't going to get it done with just the evidence. We need opportunities for larger change in frame of reference. Frame of reference. This is what I saw happen in the marriage equality movement in Minnesota when I was in seminary there. Minnesota, as you may know, was the first state in the country whose citizens voted down an anti-same-sex marriage amendment. Until that time, it was a pretty sure thing. If citizens could get an anti-same-sex marriage amendment on the ballot, the rest of the citizenry, or most of it, would vote yes, and an anti-same-sex marriage amendment would go into the Constitution of that state. It happened here. But in Minnesota, they'd seen it happen again and again and again, and they had a chance to learn and see what could be done differently. I believe the success of that marriage equality campaign was rooted in storytelling and relationships. Very actively in that campaign, neighbors talked to neighbors about why marriage equality mattered in their own lives. The success of that campaign tells me that mainstream Minnesotans, through that experience, developed simply a new frame of reference. In our Unitarian Universalist tradition, knowing that groups can be mobs or groups can be communities, we have a practice to maintain that healthy frame of reference. Traditionally, we call it a covenant. It's understandings we develop together about what we need in order to thrive in community. This way, we lend our personal conscience to the group. So maybe a covenant will be some of what comes out of our community conversations. That will be up to us. In closing, I want to share the best answer that I have today to questions of right and wrong. How do we risk moral discernment? By being in relationship with other people, with our planet, with other creatures, for some with sacred texts, for some with a sense of spirit, for some with a passion for science, for some with a sense of tradition handed down from ancestors. In other words, through relationships with each other and even ourselves. Thank you.
Our closing words are in honor of the dedication of the children that we had today. Children widen the circle of our being in ways that are limitless. Each child connects us to nature, to the innocence and exuberance of a world always hatching newborns, kittens and pups and lambs and babes. Each child reminds us of the kinship we share with people of other lands and races who love their young as purely and tenderly as we do. Each child connects us to the universe, to the holy mysteries of birth and death and becoming, from which we all emerge. Children widen the circle of our being in ways that are limitless.